Winter Break DSL with Ari and River. For Christmas, I requested several books: The Cosmic Serpent by Jeremy Narby, Supernatural by Graham Hancock, and The Shaman and Ayahuasca by Don Jose Campos, to name a few. I was fascinated by any literature that dealt with the phenomenology of power experiences. Finding the possible trajectories of my ordinary life at university to be underwhelming at best, I wanted nothing more than to have my own secret realm of experience and knowledge, the closest thing to a spiritual life I could feel. I read these books every day that winter, convinced that they got me closer and closer to a higher knowledge of the great unknown. Supernatural explores the idea that alien abduction experiences and great unknown experiences might be related in some way, at least in the sense that they both resemble a hijacking of consciousness by higher entities. For some reason, I really wanted to have an encounter with an outside secret force, perhaps to be abducted away from my academic responsibilities. During Christmas vacation in the northern woods, Ari presented me and River with the opportunity to connect to some DSL he had come across. Although my last mycospawn experience had been a bit shaky, I saw little that could go wrong with this combination of vibes. A simple hang with Ari and River at Ari's house, with nothing to worry about. We placed the DSL chips on our tongues in Ari's basement in the latter half of one morning and consumed a bit of green power while we waited for the connection to take hold. In less than an hour, we came to the agreement that the basement looked too beautiful for us to still be in normal consciousness, so we got our things together for a walk in the woods behind the house. With our snow boots on, we headed out the door, but we didn't get too far. Ari's two pet goats had somehow escaped their pen and were romping around in the neighbouring hills. We couldn't proceed with our journey with the goats on the loose and enjoy a clear conscience, what with the possibility of car accidents and other various goat scenarios. So Ari rounded the goats up and got them back in their pen as he dragged them by their collars against their stubborn resistance. I winced as he dragged them and asked if they were being hurt by the dragging. Without hesitation, he assured me that the goats were quote-unquote stupid assholes, so I shouldn't feel bad about them being handled roughly. I, on the other hand, have always had compassion for animals and wasn't sure how to feel about what he said. The odd rectangular shapes of their pupils were practically mystical and unable to communicate any thought or emotion. I chuckled as I speculated that these goats were either all-knowing or devoid of any knowledge at all. I realized I shouldn't dwell on the goats much longer in case it started to detract from the experience, so we left them in their pen and started for the forest. We walked across the crunchy snow-covered field and made it halfway to the forest's edge before we turned around to see that the goats had escaped once again. They stood up on the hill with their heads turned toward us, their blank stares now all the more menacing. The fact that they had escaped once again made me even more paranoid about their intelligence, but I nervously laughed it off. Must have left the gate open again. Too much green power for Ari, I quipped. He rushed back and tucked them away again, as River and I laughed half insanely and wondered what the real nature of this DSL connection was going to be. Ari made his way back to us and we proceeded into the forest. The forest was serene with the stillness of the birch trees, the crunching of the snow, and our unfurling minds. Our ongoing banter died down, and I felt relieved that we were finally away from the goats and possible intruders. We were on private land, so there was no need to worry about pedestrian dog walkers, hunters, etc. The faces of the forest I knew so well started to appear in the natural markings of the birch trees, and thus indicated that this was going to be a positive experience. Why else would the faces reveal themselves to us this early? Soon enough, we reached a wide meadow and stood on the dead fallen trees around us. We stared at the few clouds in the bright blue sky and were in awe of the January day. As the presence of the faces of the firmament increased, I grew more suspicious of the higher beings. They were omnipresent, weren't they? And they made sport out of our existence. "What do you want from us?" I shouted at the sky as I shook my fist at the hypothetical higher beings. It was only half in jest. I really did wonder what they wanted with us, and why these wise old faces must appear out of the firmament. Ari giggled. "Dude, chill," he said gently as he laughed. River just chuckled as he usually did when I had my moments of great unknown hilarity. I realized I could have been harshening their mellows, so I smiled and ceased my inquiry to the sky gods, or whatever they were. We made our way back to Ari's house once we felt the chill of the outdoors had crept in. Luckily, the goats were still in the pen, right where we left them, though I felt hesitant to spare them even a passing glance. The DSL started to coast oddly. I saw that it hadn't been more than 3 hours, and it was hard to tell if the effects were going to increase at all, or if we had already peaked, so to speak. We entered his house, and were gassed out by a powerful smell of shit. Ari had left his dog Ruby inside, and she had taken a massive shit on the kitchen floor. River and I laughed, but the beefiness of the stench was a vibe I wanted dealt with immediately. I went into the living room and looked at all the family pictures. I realized that I hadn't seen Ari's younger sister in a long time, and that she probably had gone through some shit, for lack of a better term. I knew that the family used to have an old, small dog, which Ari explained had escaped and been hit by a car while his sister watched. He told me this shortly after River had put on the song Places by Shlomo, a very sad, cave-like song. The emotions really had nothing to do with me, but they were overwhelming as if they did, like my empathetic bandwidth had widened. I truly felt the sadness of watching a family pet get hit by a vehicle. The melancholic mood remained. It turned out that Ari's parents were going to return, so River and I went back to my house and played some Super Smash Brothers. My house was unusually cold, so I checked to see if the heat dial was turned on. It was, but no heat came from the vents. This certainly meant we were out of oil, and I prayed that my mother had called the oil guy to fill it up before nightfall. No doubt it would get below freezing, and though we had the wood stove, that only heated the living room. I apologized to River for the discomfort. "No worries, man, but I'm going to head home now," he said politely. Neither of us really cared about the video game, with no shared urge to compete in friendly competition. Once he left, I took a shower and realized that I felt stranger and more confused than I felt comfortable. My mother was going to return in an hour, and I was definitely still quite in the great unknown, and with perhaps 5 more hours to go of great unknown uncertainty. Still, I had done this before, and I would do it again. I'd get over it. My mom got home and immediately fussed about the lack of heat. I explained that it wouldn't come on, which she replied to with an expletive. There wasn't going to be any oil for the night, so we were going to have to keep the wood stove going all night, and would all had to sleep in the living room. There was no way I was going to sleep with my parents in the same room, much less with them getting up every few hours to put more wood on the fire. For some reason we decided to watch Pan's Labyrinth until my dad got home, which wasn't the greatest pick for someone feeling weird on DSL. It's not really a feel-good movie for a mother and son, regardless of mental state in the first place. About a quarter of the way through, I told my mum I really wasn't enjoying the vibes in the movie. Though it seemed funny to her, since I usually loved Pan's Labyrinth, she understood that with the lack of heat and whatnot, I was probably in a strange mood. My dad got home and was clearly irritated with the heat situation as well. To watch both of my parents get so rattled by this situation while I was connected to DSL made me see that they were just people like anyone else trying to make things work for their family. They were just children who had gotten old, like all other parents. I didn't want them to feel so bad about letting the heat go out like that, but at the same time, I was disappointed that they didn't plan ahead. The whole thing made me feel like they juggled more than they'd like to, and were probably stressed most of the time. I called River and told him my situation, that the vibe was not going well at home, and that I really did not want to sleep in the living room with my parents. He welcomed me to stay at his place, and said that he also felt weird around his parents. We shacked up in his room and listened to music while we consumed a little green power and tried to detect the dwindling DSL. We agreed that it had been an odd connection. He said he wasn't sure how much more he wanted to connect with DSL in the future, and felt like it hadn't brought him anywhere good this time. I understood, since I had felt that a few times myself, but realised that for now I should be thankful that I was on the tail end of it, and it hadn't really been that bad. The earlier parts of the day were nice enough, but between the goats, the fist shaking at the sky, and the extreme empathy, I was ready for reality again. Just like it always did, reality returned the next day, and I went on with my life. So it was back to Hip Forest for the second semester once winter break ended. I felt kind of stuck in the vibe of the last DSL connection. I wasn't left feeling too enlightened by the great unknown. The deep sadness I felt at Hip City College was back for all the same reasons. I couldn't decide on a major. I felt isolated from certain friend groups, and none of my dating pursuits stuck. What was my appeal, really, if I had no idea what career path made sense for me and was ultimately a loner? I couldn't tell if I needed another DSL experience to get myself out of the funk, or if I should stray from the stuff for good. What was it about my earlier connections that had made them so devoid of negative energy, like DSL was a net positive? What sense could be made of the growing darkness?